All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the end of the world. Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I am Stu, and today we are mixing up our modus operandi, if you will,
Hmm.
in that we're going to spend the majority of the episode talking about well, we think we are. We'll see how this goes. But we're going to spend the majority of time talking about a troubling and disturbing new trend that is sweeping the world of luxury travel, which I know is
Hmm.
a realm that is of great importance to both Michael and to myself.
And the
Uh,
listeners, no doubt.
yeah, well, I've seen our demographic numbers, and they're all just in the 1% S
That's right.
tier earning category. No, 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 of course not. That the topic though is so-called last chance tourism,
Hmm.
and there've been a couple articles about it in the last few months, and I found some articles even from a couple years ago. And the basic idea is that, well, folks, climate change is coming, and pretty soon there are certain places that we know are basically guaranteed to be destroyed.
Hmm.
So you better
Or
get.
or unrecognizable.
Yeah, well, whatever their most notable aspect is will be gone or irrevocably changed because of
Hmm.
rising sea levels, glacial melt, and there's a certain number of people that are rushing to see these places before they're destroyed. Michael, you're the one who brought this topic to our attention. What is it about it that you find most interesting, troubling? Uh,
Well, I mean,
dir-
there are a few different things, but I think the first thing that sort of jumps out is this. I think it sort of speaks to, part of what the podcast wants to address, which is the strange way in which the administration of society and life is sort of built on the management of the collapse itself and existing within, let's say, euphemistically near collapse, seemingly, hopefully, I guess, in perpetuity, right? Um, and one of the ways that that seems to sort of be on display here is that it's not just that people are seeking out these places, which are, some of the examples are the Great Barrier Reef of Australia. Venice, obviously, is a big one. Um, and one of the articles dealt specifically with Mer de Glace in France, which is a beautiful location to go skiing. Um, and one of the controversies was that they actually built a new ski lift specifically designed to compensate for the retreating ice so that skiers, as opposed to adjusting to that, actually can still experience this thing despite the danger that the ecosystem itself is facing. And what I mean by managing the collapse is that in this particular instance, the forces of capitalism sort of, comically in my mind, have identified this even as a market, right? So one of the things that we found, in addition to, articles in the New York Times or what have you that were talking about the phenomenon, were listicles like, the 11 best places to do last chance tourism,
Yeah, this
right?
is from a magazine I wasn't subscribed to, believe it or not, before
Not yet, not yet.
which is Luxury Travel Magazine. It doesn't even feel like a
Yes.
real magazine. It feels, as you say, like just sort of a listicle aggregating site. And
Yep.
yeah, so just reading from the article a little bit, with many of the world's top travel destinations threatened by climate change and neglect, last chance tourism is on the rise. Um, Below are 11 destinations ranging from Antarctica to
Hmm.
Turkmenistan that travelers might want to consider visiting while they can. Pack a suitcase, grab a camera, and head to one of these amazing destinations before they disappear.
Right. And in fact, we also found a site, like an actual touring site, a company
Yeah.
that bases some of its tours on the idea that you won't be able to go to these places forever. And so, I mean, obviously, at first there's just the like sheer desperation of the fact that this could even exist, right? That we're at this place where these attractions, whether they're Venice or Mount Kilimanjaro, are obviously of great importance to people, right?
Yeah.
Sort of bucket list items. But, in the bigger picture, they don't matter close to enough to provide any sense of like, how do we actually protect these things
Sure.
as the like greater environmental picture sort of decays.
No, it's almost like they matter only because of their bucket list item status or something, right?
Right. And then the next step of that strange perversion is that they might be gone. And so they become, ironically, a greater attraction, right?
Right. And the paradox,
it's no longer like I saw Venice before I was dead. It's
I saw Venice
before Venice died. Yeah. Right. And like, that part of it is, obviously quite tragic, but also I think very indicative of the overall viewpoint of like trying to combat a thing like climate change, right? And one of the things that this touring company does, which takes it to a whole other level, of course, is that it packages these things as like cultural and educational experiences, right? So their idea is that you come, you help make the situation worse.
Well, right. This is the feedback loop of the paradox of the scenario.
That's right. Right.
I mean, so on the one hand, they claim, oh no, but if you see like the way the reef is dying as global warming increases, that'll inspire you to advocate. But it's like this trade-off where the act of going to see the reef or the glacier, building the ski lift, whatever it is contributing to the destruction. Right. So it's but like, also, we've got to prevent this, and in order to prevent this, we must hasten it.
Yeah, we must hasten it, and like also this idea, it sort of speaks to the great. I mean, there's the fallacy of awareness. What I would call sort of mere awareness. The idea that like, well, I had a hell of a time at the Great Barrier Reef and heard from some locals about the trouble that the area is in.
I met a merman, and
I bring bags when I go shopping ever since. They're like, it's like, what exactly is this touring group thinking these people are going to then do, right?
Right.
Other than the sort of like banal individual austerity that at the current moment seems to be the only real prescription for climate change.
Which we've talked about before, although not in a little while, but yeah, this is one of the great, again, the sort of offloading of responsibility onto the individual for environmental disaster. Also, this sort of Twitter activism mentality where it's like, hey, Michael, I noticed you haven't like been posting about that controversial thing. Like, you're not doing your part, buddy. As if like just by quote unquote raising awareness of whatever atrocity the government has done or some other disaster, like as if by not fully embracing that kind of very performative activism, you're Michael, you're actually part of the problem.
Right,
and Michael, your friends are talking about this. Just FYI, right? Like there's this weird social energy.
There's also this like very strange phenomenon of like that shows the limitations of awareness, right? So one of the things that we found when we were studying the topic, right, is that people go and they learn about the threats that the landscape is under while admiring its beauty and obviously contributing in some small way to its decay.
Yeah.
But they also surveyed people who do this, and something like 3/4 of respondents like said that while it gave them a greater awareness of the seriousness of climate change, they also didn't think that what they were doing was part of the problem. Right? Like, so it's like it's this wonderful sort of cognitive dissonance, right? That in a sense is a sort of microcosm of how this individual approach to what is clearly a collective issue, and not even just
Yeah.
collective issue, but a top-down issue, um, how it actually operates in all of society. Because in your own like tiny life, you either pat yourself on the back for doing something really small or justify not doing something small with a sort of brand of, cynicism or nihilism that is like, well, this wouldn't actually do anything anyway, right?
Yeah, and I mean that is something we've talked about before too, right? Like there is a strong temptation to become black-pilled about all of this when you
Yeah.
like realize how little individual, you know, actions are going to
Right.
contribute to helping.
Or
And
even like something like supposedly collective, like how few things actually get recycled.
yeah.
Right, that like that's largely a scam on its own, and even that feels like something you're a part of. Everyone's recycling, everyone's
Well, you're putting it in the bin, and then you're just
you're
kind of
putting it in the
you're
bin. Yeah.
trusting that it's gonna make its way to the plant and not
Right.
just end up in a mountain of trash alongside a
Right.
highway somewhere.
But it
Um,
is like tourism, what did we find? Like, just get away from last chance tourism for a second, is that tourism contributes, I think it's 8%
that's right.
to
8%
carbon
of carbon
emissions.
emissions from air travel are caused by tourism, which is not nothing, right? I
It's
mean,
not nothing. It's
but
not
there
nothing.
is another 92% that presumably is being caused by business, right? Like
Sure.
business and like I don't know what's the other use. I mean, shipping, right? A lot of people are sending packages. Although I guess
Well, right. But like this is where to me, this is where the lines are a little bit blurred, right? Because obviously it is like the classic counter to the individual response is like X amount, crazy huge amount of carbon emissions, 90% or by 100 corporations or whatever. And it's
right.
like, yeah, well, I mean that's true, but also like, you know, we do like tap into the resources provided by that.
Give
We
me
do
my
make use
Amazon
of
Prime, gosh darn
right.
it, right? Like
Exactly. Exactly.
I need my
And like
Blu-ray tomorrow, not 2 days
right.
from now.
Right. And so like you on the one hand you'll listen to a political candidate and you're like, how short-sighted, you know? We're always just thinking with the dollar and we're not fixing any of these problems. But then in your individual life, it is very hard to not do the same thing. And then you can justify it by being like, well, it's not going to make any real difference, right? And like tourism, again, that's not a small percentage. And like I don't know. I don't know where I stand on tourism. You know, on the one hand, I like going places, but like, where have I ever really been? Like I commercial flight is an environmental problem. I think
yeah.
that's like fair to say.
Oh,
And like
absolutely.
it is a little bit out of sort of step with what we think of as like a looming scarcity, that like I can set a Google alert and like hop over to Aspen for like $129 if I choose to go on a Wednesday. Like that does feel weird, but like in a very short space of time, if we're talking like a bigger historical picture, that like if you wanted to go west a few hundred years ago, it could take like decades off
Just
of your
get
life,
join up with your friends the Donner Party, right?
Right,
Like
right, right. Whereas now it's like I am, not a man of means, and I go plenty of places, and
yeah.
there just seems something a little bit not like maybe morally wrong, or certainly not like
But it's strange
things
that
would
our culture has prioritized the ability of you or I to go to California relatively affordably whenever we want.
right, and that you could say to anybody questioning you like, well, I mean, you gotta see Kilimanjaro, and a lot of people will be like, well, yeah,
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 my parents went.
I mean,
They
it's like,
climbed Kilimanjaro.
or you're like, like you just say something like, me, I've always wanted to see Venice. And then that becomes part of your personality. It's like, well, of course, he's been trying to go to Venice for so long. I'm just glad
Have you
that
ever been to Venice?
I went to Venice when I was, I believe, 4 years old.
Okay, so you don't have a lot of cogent
No, when
memories
was
of
the last
that.
time you went to Venice?
2014, I think. And I went to Italy for 2 weeks, and I went to Venice twice actually because I flew in
Hmm.
there and then I had to fly back out. And it's horrible. Like,
Really?
yeah, I
What's it
mean,
like? I mean, it's worse now, you think? Probably, right?
I mean, I was there in the middle of winter. I went in January because that's when I have time off from school, and it is even then overrun with tourists, like to a degree that even Rome doesn't feel as overrun with tourists.
Wow.
Yeah, I would say Amsterdam is the only other place I've been. Maybe I'm equating them because they both have canals too. There's like a
People are just obsessed with intricate urban waterways, I
yeah.
guess.
Well, I think it's also these cities have great art, right? So there's a lot of tourism from
Sure.
all over the world of people coming to see. In Amsterdam, it's like the Van Gogh Museum, right? In Venice, it's like the churches, right? The looted Byzantine relics in the
Mm.
Piazza di San Marco
But
or
there are
whatever.
people who just go for the fact that the city's on water.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's and
Never
to
that
go
the
in
thought never really
the
never
gondola.
really blew me
Well, the
away.
city
I just don't
it
understand really why that's
stinks.
so
It's the whole
impressive.
city smells because
Yeah.
it's surrounded by dank canal water. Um, it's very inconvenient. I was staying on the Lido, which is like the happening place to be in the summer, but
Mm.
in the winter, I was literally like the only person in this massive hotel, and it was like me and the the check-in guy. He'd be like, "Oh,
Yeah.
hey, you're still here." And then I'd have to go and I'd have to take a water taxi just to get over to like the main area where everything is. Yeah, I mean, I get it. It's cool. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with Venice because, oh my God, it's sinking. Like, I just this sort of Atlantis kind of
Right.
catastrophic vibe. Um, but then actually being there, I was like, I much prefer um, Naples, almost any other part of Italy, if I'm being honest. Um,
Yeah, I've also experienced that, like, again, not that these things are any like great quick fix, but like there have you ever been backpacking for any duration?
yeah, but not since I was a teenager.
Like there are like you do see when you are able to spend time like traveling, and it's this is not to like separate myself from the problem at all, but like there really are people who are like really quite terrible at it, like in terms of like not respecting the fact that they're visiting a
Oh
place,
yeah. Well, if
right?
you're an
And like,
American, I mean, you're
yeah, but I mean,
you're a Canadian American, but you have the advantage of you can just pull out that Canadian passport whenever.
sure. But like
Remember the thing of
like
Americans like sewing Canadian flags on their
yeah.
backpacks?
That was like a Bush era
Yeah,
relic,
I
I
think
feel, right?
so.
Yeah.
And
But my point is that like when I went backpacking for a few months in Central America, my friend and I who I traveled with, we saved enough money to be able to do things very easily. Obviously, it's much cheaper down there.
sure.
But you run into these like I would say the average backpacker is kind of like this sort of like parasitic budget traveler, right? Where I found like, and one of the reasons I just like wouldn't entertain it was that 90% of these people's conversations while they're like finally away from their like shitty job, finally doing like some exciting thing with their life or whatever, even if it's just traveling around for a couple months, 90% of their conversations are about the cost of an activity and debating whether to do that activity. But you would meet these people, these tourists who would like routinely complain and not like and be like, oh well, that national park has a higher entrance fee for tourists, so I don't think I'm going to go there. And it's like, my man, it's $5, first of all, you know. Secondly, like, you are that. You are
You are a
the tourist.
tourist,
Like,
right?
right. Like, and so it's funny, like on the heels of like the last chance tourism thing, that like you also have this whole group of people who are traveling the world who like don't want to contribute anything to address the fact that they are there and that they are having an impact on the land or the area that they're in.
Right. I mean, I think about this a lot. I've done a lot of traveling, particularly in the last 12 years, although not so much since COVID. But from like 2012 to 2019, I went over to Europe, I don't know, 8 or 9 times, a lot of times. And I thought about this a lot because I always travel by myself because I'm a lone wolf. I'm a dangerous rebel. Um, and well, I'm single. I just never, no one ever wanted to go with me. I'm hated by my friend groups. No, I have friends that I would visit and stuff like that. But
Sure.
yeah, there is a certain kind of duality to it, where on the one hand, you're in this place. I spent a lot of time in Turkey, and you're in this place that's very clearly dependent on tourism, right?
Hmm.
They need you. They want you to come to their terrible SpongeBob themed bar in like
Sure.
Antalya, Turkey. And they want you to. I can't tell you how many bars I found in Turkey that were called just Brooklyn. You
Amazing.
know, and so there's like clearly this industry, but at the same time, you're like this, in my case, weird white guy who's like, you know, by himself, like just like in this ancient place where, I mean, Turkey's a bad example because the history is very complicated, but you know, like clearly quite different from the locals. So you are aware of
Hmm.
yourself as being like an outsider who's like in a sense encroaching on this like culture of
Yeah.
which you were definitively not a part, but at the same time they like want you to be doing that because you're spending money and it's helping their economy, you know. But
Right.
there's this but if you're oblivious to that sort of consideration, you know, you're just like tramping all over the place, acting like a
Yep.
buffoon, like destroying
Right.
stuff.
And that, I mean, that sort of like ties back into the last chance tourism thing because these areas particularly are dependent on the tourism that has helped to destroy the thing that created the tourism, right?
Yeah, well, like the Vale of Chamonix, which is where the glacier is, a very important place in the history of Romanticism. Actually, that's one of the
Oh, really?
places Wordsworth visits in his epic poem, The Prelude.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
and it's like one of the famous like ways to get through the Alps goes through
Hmm.
Chamonix. And have you ever been into Switzerland or in the Alps at all?
Just on a train.
Oh yeah, yeah, I took a bunch of when I was I think maybe 15 or 16. I went on a school trip and we went up from Milan on a bus through the
Hmm.
Alps, and like we went up to I think we eventually flew out from Zurich. Breathtaking, incredible, weird country, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, like you're right. Like, what is Switzerland? You know, they have banking, they make clocks, and they have ski resorts, right? I mean, these are
Chocolate,
no
chocolate.
chocolate. My mistake, right? But there's like yeah, this kind of place needs tourism. So it's like they've got. Are they gonna like milk every last drop of blood from this like
Right.
industry, or like are they going to move to restrict it, right? I mean, some of the articles we looked at talked about how it's like, well, maybe we limit how many tourists come to
Hmm.
this site or whatever, but then it's like, oh, but business interests push back on that. And I think we see these kind of push and pulls with any effort to curb any aspect of you know, to do anything to help the environment, right? There's
That's
always
right.
these like something I think about a lot though is like yeah, like this is a different area, but like in the United States with the health insurance thing, people are like, well, you know, if you make uh, if you make health insurance, you know, paid for by the government or whatever, what's going to happen to all the poor Aetna workers or whatever, you know,
Right. Right.
like
Right.
this. And I just think of how many industries there are where there's been absolutely no consideration given to the toll booth operator who's now
Yep.
been automated out of existence, the factory worker whose job is shipped off to China or Southeast Asia or what have you. And yet, in certain areas, when it's like, well, the world is going to die if we don't, it's like, but Stu, but think of the poor oil magnate, you
Right,
know,
right. But
like
that's, I mean, that's again sort of like one of the, it's sort of like a microcosm of this notion of managing an entire society in a state of near collapse, right? Is it down to the individual that people who don't have means are themselves managing their own lives in a state of near collapse. And
right.
so whenever they have to weigh that against any greater long-term concern, like if you run a hostel and that's your means of survival and you're set up near the Great Barrier Reef, well, there's
That
not exactly a system set up so that you what
you
if I
can
mean if
you
we
can like rebound. You
right,
can't.
I mean we already have no idea how we're going to like retrain truck drivers or whatever the case may be. But the same
Yeah,
goes
no,
for
exactly.
these types of places, right?
Exactly.
And so like
Taxi drivers, whoever,
right,
automation
which
replaces
is
next.
why you get to that perverse notion that so many people hold in a survey like that, which is no, I'm actually a part of the solution, not part of the problem. I came
I'm doing my
and
part to spread
right, and
advocacy and awareness.
like it's like the Zizek example, right? The Tom shoes, right? Like if you buy a pair, another pair gets given to someone in need, right? So it's like if you come and experience this amazing thing, 4.5% of that will go to some conservation fund that
Right.
you can pretend will help, maintain both the environmental and yes, the economic
But what's
considerations.
happening with Tom's shoes? I feel like we haven't heard about
I
them in a
don't know.
while.
I don't know.
If they've gone under.
They're
They've
probably
been
making like a
there's
hard seltzer.
there's like a
Like
brutal hostile takeover by
yeah, yeah,
by
yeah.
hard seltzer
Right, right.
conglomerates.
They're moving into the hard seltzer
Tom
space.
has unfortunately been executed. Anyway, Tom is like leading January 6th or something. Okay.
Yeah.
One other thing about this that I wanted to talk about is this other weird inversion, right? Where you go back in human history, and especially Age of Discovery onwards, there's this fetishization of like being the first to be Columbus was the first
Hmm.
European to come to the United States or the Americas. Uh, Sir Edmund Hillary was the first
Yeah.
person to summit Mount Everest with Tenzing
Hmm.
Norgay or whatever, right? Um, the race to the South Pole. Robert Falcon Scott was a second man. Oh, what a disgrace! And now we're, with this like last chance thing, it's like you're now in a race to be the last person.
Yes, that's right. Right.
One of the New York Times article I think mentioned this, but it's like I just think there's something really funny. Like you're like there's like a glacier that's like a snowball essentially at this right. It's
Right.
like and you and like some other tourist are like holding each
Yeah,
other at
yeah,
gunpoint.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you
We talked about
leave. I'm
this.
gonna be the last one, not you.
Right.
Like
We talked about this a bit before, right? That like what's going to develop as it gets worse and worse is like last chance tourism, right? Where like you're just paying way over the odds to get as close to the actual end. And so like when back in the old days, people would go on holiday and they'd like put together slideshows for at like
yeah, you're
asteroid
like
parties
here
and stuff.
is the death
Yeah.
of the
Look at
glacier.
this. Look at this. Look at this. The ice literally melted in front of me. How
Yeah.
fucking amazing is that?
Right. You're like watching ice melt. It's
Yeah.
like I was thinking a little bit about the Titanic tourism that was in the news last year when that tragic pod imploded
Oh,
and those
right. Yeah.
tourists died. But like part of the reason a lot of these people have such a mania to visit the Titanic is it its wreckage is decaying, right? Just tidal forces, erosion, right? So it's like gotta get down there. Oh, this guy's got a cheaper deep sea submersible that I
Yeah.
like. Get me in there. I'm gonna be one of the 165 people that have seen, or whatever it
Yeah.
is. Like you're trying to get into this club. Same with the like space tourism, right? There's this weird. I mean, with the Titanic, it's last chance because the ship will be
Yes.
destroyed
That's
and
right.
forgotten.
That's right.
Um, but the space tourism is another like symptom of a sort of a cultural rot. Like, why do you want to go to space? Like,
Right.
it seems kind of dangerous. But
Well, I mean, it's also like part of the overall where I come back to what I was saying earlier, where like, I mean, I'm not saying no one should ever go anywhere, but like we probably go too many places and
yeah,
for too easily that like a run of the mill like beautiful landscape isn't enough. So like I have to go to fucking Mount Kilimanjaro.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
come on. Like you're getting away for a few days, like just go somewhere that looks pretty nice and hang out for a bit. Like
Right.
that should
You live
probably
in New
do it
York,
for you.
Hudson Valley. It's not
Right,
that far.
right. And now
Very
it's like
nice.
no, fuck Mount Kilimanjaro. I want space. Like
Or like Antarctica.
yeah,
I'm going to the South Pole.
yeah,
God damn you all. So I think this is interesting. It's bad. It's a symptom of something rotten in the state of the world, right? I mean, like,
Right. I mean,
uh,
it's a paradox that shows itself basically everywhere, right?
yeah, I think we've already even just talking a couple related issues
Yeah.
have arisen. Um, so why don't we talk about the movie that we watched for this week, which is also about tourism and about
Hmm.
a sort of fantasy of escape, right? I feel like this was a bigger impulse in the 90s. I mean, it comes back repeatedly, right? This desire of like, I'm going to get away to some tropical, isolated place and
Yeah.
sort of leave the world behind in a,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
mean, you certainly like I was traveling when I backpacked, I think it was like 2007,
yeah,
so a fair bit later. But you there's another exchange I would have with these people a lot that always confused me, that like the desire was you go to a remote place, but then you go to the remote place there. You don't want to do like you are a tourist, but you don't want to like do the tourist stuff, right?
yeah,
And so this idea of like, this kind of does play in perfectly, which is why we chose the movie, right? Is that like these travelers are not simply satisfied with, banging around Thailand for a bit and
right.
going to all the beaches where everyone goes. No, they have to like disappear themselves, and go to the most beautiful beach, and no one's there, which is funny because there are a bunch of people there. It's
Yeah,
not even
yeah.
like
There are a lot of people there, and there's no thought given at all to um any idea of like whose beach is it? Like
yeah,
who should be the people that have access to this beach, right? It's like this weirdly colonialist attitude that we see in these characters. I mean, the movie is The Beach, directed by Danny Boyle, came out in the year
mhm.
2000. We were just talking.
Early DiCaprio.
Yeah, late twink phase DiCaprio.
Yes.
He was not yet fully.
Not, yeah, yeah.
He hadn't
Not
entered. He hadn't entered
not a
his.
girl, not yet a woman phase.
He hadn't become the new Jack Nicholson quite yet. I feel
Right,
like
right.
after Gangs of New York, he's kind of
He was
fully.
still dating age appropriate
Yeah,
women.
yeah.
Yeah.
Roughly speaking. So this is hilariously based on a novel by Alex Garland,
We're
not
back.
not written by Garland, but the movie was not,
Yeah.
and it is directed by Danny Boyle, with whom Garland would later collaborate on 28 Days Later. I think was the next film that they worked on together. Um, it's about escapism. The main character, played by DiCaprio, is Richard, who is in Thailand. He's in his early 20s, and he, as you said, is dissatisfied with the like normal hedonistic escapism of
Yeah.
Thailand and needs to go
Mere
deeper.
hedonism.
Yeah, mere hedonism is not enough.
Yeah.
And he meets this crazy guy called Daffy, who is smokes pot. I mean, this came out when this came out. Smoking pot was edgy in a way that it just absolutely is not. Right,
Yeah.
almost 25 years later.
And could like distort the mind in
Yeah, it has this
movies in a
idea
way
of
that's
like
just not
when
real.
you smoke pot, you're like, whoa, who am I?
Yeah.
Right, which
Yeah.
has not ever been my experience. But I remember when I saw this a little bit after it came out, being scandalized by the fact that there was so much pot in this movie. And then watching it again this week, I was
Yeah,
just
there's
like,
one field.
there's a field of pot. They smoke a
Yeah.
couple joints. It's
Yeah, I've
actually
seen I've
like
seen grow operations in like New England that have more weed in them now,
oh, way more. And
Yeah.
anyway, so he gets this map from this guy who then mysteriously has killed himself the next day, and it's to this legendary perfect beach.
Hmm.
Um, and he sort of sets out on a quest to find this. He has to travel to these other islands. It's kind of remote. He meets up with these French couple, and they join him on this quest. He immediately falls in love with the French woman, but
Hmm.
she has a boyfriend. Um, they also he's hanging out at this like cabana, and he meets these like frat bros,
Yeah.
and for some unknown reason he also gives them a copy of
Yeah.
this map.
They try to make it this like philosophical, like this is the duty of the traveler to
Yeah.
pass on this information. It's like some child who's decided to like backpack for the first time,
He's
just
like, well,
seemingly tapped into some like
as Socrates teaches, you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
like
exactly,
just
exactly. Right.
and that will end up being
Which is amazing because it's like his experience so far is meeting a like drug-addled
who
maniac
literally,
who who literally shows up is ends up dead in his room
yeah, the next day.
the next day, I seemingly by suicide, but potentially murder.
Well, yeah,
And
it's not explained.
so the act of even going to the beach would be insane enough.
Yeah,
But then, despite the clear danger that was this guy's in, he then is like, "What if I just show these random people that I just met the map? Let's see what happens." Like it's again, it's a classic example of like the idea of the movie excuses like all of these very obvious plot point decisions and obstacles. So like
well, right, and
clearly these
like,
guys are going to show up and they're not supposed to, and like clearly we're going to have him go with this couple, and that's going to be an obstacle because he's in love with her, but she's taken.
yeah,
And it's just like it felt the whole movie feels so written.
and it feels very contrived. Yeah, like
That's right.
the conflicts are all self-created and stupid,
Yeah.
and we um as soon as he gives the map, you're just like, oh, that's gonna be a problem, right? I mean, there's like
Yeah.
no mystery. Eventually, he and the couple get to this other remote island, and luckily avoid being massacred by the the weed farmers that live there, and guard it with a leashed monkey and a machine gun.
Right, which is another one of the like colonial elements of this, right? Like you said, there's no discussion about who deserves the place, who owns it, who should be able to access this perfect beach. It's that there are these white folks who have found it and for some reason get it, and then their counterparts are not like the state or people who live there, but this like drug
drug
dealing
lord
evil entity. Right, right.
There's no like indigenous village or something that
Yeah,
no, it's
yeah.
like no, their opponents are these
Right. But
criminals.
one of the things I would say, so like after this incident that they escape from, obviously they arrive at the beach, and as you can imagine, it's quite idyllic at the beginning.
And most of the
And
people there
my
are white Europeans, and then there's a
That's right.
couple black Europeans as well, right? There's a
Yes,
black
that's
guy
right.
who's obsessed with
But
cricket.
what's interesting, right, is that I mean, again, I haven't seen the movie in 20 years or so, right?
Yeah,
That I remembered it as like, and then it gets really crazy and culty and people get seriously fucked up. That doesn't really happen in the movie, in fact,
no.
right? Like a shark kills a guy,
Tilda
right?
Swinton is the leader, and she's a little
Yeah,
bit culty. She doesn't want to get there's a couple Swedes. One gets killed by the shark. The other has a leg injury, and she
yeah.
doesn't want to let him go to see a doctor.
Mhm.
Or no, she'll let him go, but he's afraid of water. So, but
Right.
she refuses to bring a doctor to the beach, like,
Yep.
and so he's like slowly dying of gangrene. And initially, people were like, "Oh man, this is killing my vibe. Oh, enough! Like with the screaming, God." So they eventually just deposit him deeper in the woods,
Right.
and only Etienne, the French man, who's by this point has been thrown over. His girlfriend is dating Leo instead.
Yeah.
Shock.
Yeah.
And he's a good person, so he like tends to this guy who's like got gang. He's dying, but
Yeah.
he won't abandon him. The rest of the beach commune people are just like, oh, all right, he's gone. Like, let's play volleyball.
Right, but that's the point of the movie where you think a bunch of crazy shit will start to unfold, but it just doesn't happen.
No, and like he does a supply run with Tilda Swinton, Sal, who's like the leader,
Mhm.
and she coerces him into sleeping with her.
Yeah.
And
Looked like it was a tough sell.
yeah, that was like the only funny scene is they have sex and they're talking and afterwards, and she's like, "Now get some sleep. I may wish to have sex again before we eat breakfast." So eventually, the dreaded event happens. The preppy frat boy like Americans find the beach and are spotted on the next island over. So Leo Richard is sent to as a sentinel to guard against their coming. And he goes crazy. There's a kind of apocalypse now, like
Attempt.
jungle madness that takes over that just
falls very flat.
Seems very stupid. And eventually those tourists are caught by the drug dealers and like massacred in front of Leo. And this is kind of snaps him out of his delirium, and he realizes, oh, the situation is actually untenable and kind of F. So meanwhile, the French girl has gone back to her original boyfriend because Tilda Swinton blew up his spot and was like, we slept together on the supply run. And all of this feels very inconsequential, right?
The whole thing.
Eventually, they try to escape. Richard smothers the dying Swedish guy as like a mercy killing, right?
Yeah.
But then they're captured by the Thai drug lords. There's this final scene where the Thai drug lord is like, to Tilda Swinton's character, you know, you can stay, but you have to kill Leo. He's the
as retribution.
That if you do that, then you can stay because you let new people in you weren't supposed to. And so she gets
even though they don't know if they made copies of the map either.
Like, yeah, I mean, there's so many.
Makes no sense that they would be allowed to stay.
There's so many other contingencies that are not accounted for. She takes the gun that he gives her, points it to Leo's head, and just pulls the trigger. Oh, it's not loaded.
It was a test.
Oh, she failed. So with that gesture where she reveals that she's literally willing to kill to maintain this ideal, it kind of spoils the whole
vibe. Vibes are off. The vibes are off.
Yeah, there's a bit of vibe shift, and the reports are not good. And then they get away. They abandon Tilda Swinton stays, but everyone else, even her boyfriend, who's an asshole, leaves. They're all like on this raft as if they are Vietnamese boat people. I think that's what the image it kind of invoked, right?
Absolutely.
People fleeing the aftermath of the North Vietnamese takeover of South Vietnam. Except they're all white. And they're, well, mostly white. And the next thing we see is Richard, Leo, is back in the U.S., and he's in this hellish internet
cafe. Like a 90s internet cafe.
And and they have those bubbly iMacs with the like neon or weird fluorescent colors. Yeah. And he logs into his Expedia account, or no, his Excite account. I'd completely forgot about Excite. And his ID is just Richard, and then he types in his pass. I was like, damn.
Available.
I was like, damn.
This username is available.
He just got the name Richard. Wow, he's early adopter. Damn. And the last scene is like this photo they all took at the beach, and it's like, you know, happier times. Like it seems like another world or something. And it's very unclear to me, like, what the message of this movie even is. Like, it doesn't really... I've heard that the book is better, actually. That there's more, going on philosophically.
Although, I'm sure we'll get there, since this podcast does aim to be a greatest of Alex Garland's entire body of work.
Well, yeah. I don't know. Like, it's not very good, right?
No, the last thing that I would say about it, and I think why it ended up making a sort of fitting choice for this week with the podcast talking about last chance tourism, is that it speaks to this, like, you almost partially think of it as like the successful, like, propaganda of tourism in a sense, but also a sad statement on like the value that people have in their lives where they are, right? That there is this idea, to take the extreme in this movie, right, that getting away provides the ability to find meaning, right? Yeah. And in the case of this, in the case of this movie, it's even bigger than that. It's that, like, you live your individualist Western humdrum life, and only completely divorced from, the community that you actually live in, only there could you experience true commune with other men, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a really interesting, whether that was like deliberate on the part of the filmmaker or the writer, it's an interesting takeaway to me because I do think it really applies to the way that people do cling to tourism, the way that people do try to get to as many spots and places, and the places you have to see before you die, the
Yeah.
events of your life, the ones that like to make memories, um, and the ability to do that at home, oftentimes living in a social landscape that is more and more devoid of a sense of community, there is this imagination that if you are somewhere else, um, it's always thought to be like a time of reflection,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
A time for perspective, which for some reason in our setup, people think is impossible to like do at home, right? And that like the greatest meaning in your life will come from either
From
like
getting away. Yeah.
either the immediate nuclear family experience or
Yeah.
getting away from that and like into, you know
Yeah, I'm
and
reminded. I'm reminded of this.
that sort of came to me while I was watching it, and how it sort of ties into what we've been talking about, that like that to get away from just the like climate change aspect of it for
Yeah,
a
yeah,
second,
yeah.
that
No,
there is something kind of sad about how much we all sort of cling to elsewhere,
yeah.
you know what I
Oh,
mean,
for
as
sure.
the way to find ourselves.
Oh, I had a friend who's a year or two older than me in college, and he came back. I think I was a senior. He came back to school for some reason or another, and was like, "Oh, Stu, like good to see you." And I was like, "Hey, like, what have you been up to?" And he's like, "Oh, been over in Paris, just doing that whole expat thing." And he's like, "It's great. You got to do it. It's just the best."
Yeah.
And just like what I thought was interesting, even at the time, was like, "All right, well, that's quite cliched, but also
Mhm.
just like, what are you doing?" He didn't explain at all what he was doing. He was just like,
Right.
"Are you like painting? Are you doing a certificate program in French, or like it was just like, no,
Right.
I'm going there solely to be an expat, right? I'm going
Right.
there to like have this like experience of being an expatriate in
Right.
this the most stereotypical place for
Right.
Americans to
And
go."
it's somehow more
And
authentic
it's
than
well,
simply
it's also just
being in your life.
self-explanatory, right? Like I'm
Right.
doing that whole expat thing. Like I'm immediately supposed to be like, got it, right?
Yeah.
Like
Well, it's
say
again
no
like it's
more.
also like the last thought that I sort of have on it is like it speaks to the way that people's daily lives and sort of the menial labor of their lives is often like so meaningless, right?
Yeah,
And travel time, especially in a society like ours, is so scarce. Like even if you have like a real quote unquote job, like a good job, you
yeah,
might get like 2 weeks paid vacation. And so like one way of looking at that is if you live your adult life working with 2 weeks paid vacation, which if you tell someone, oh, I got a new job, oh yeah, 2 weeks paid vacation, most people here are like, oh, that's good, right? But if you like do the math on that, that means that you have to have 26 years of labor for 1 year
yeah,
of time. And that's like a fucked up concept to me,
yeah,
right? That
yeah,
like,
yeah.
and then it's no wonder in a sense that people then like empty the chamber
Yeah.
for their trips, for their like scraps of time
Doing
that they have for
Kilimanjaro, and
themselves.
then we're jetting
Right.
across to
And like
Rio. Just
I
those
talked
2 weeks
to
are going to be amazing.
right, like my friend and I talk about this a lot, and one of the things that we've said a few times about it is like, while obviously you change a lot more when you're younger just by
Yeah,
virtue of developing,
sure.
um if you were lucky enough, and a lot of people did this, whether they would like go to camp for the summer, or in Canada a lot of people would go to the cottage for the summer,
Yeah,
or you would just have off from school for the summer, and you would feel like I think everyone experienced this, like you're off for the summer and like you come back to like eighth grade from seventh and you like are different,
you feel like a
you
different
know
person. Absolutely.
right? And like granted, again, some of that is just the process of developing, but also one wonders like how much of our arrested development as people is foisted upon us by the lack of time we have
Mm,
to be away from what we're doing. And that doesn't mean necessarily be away from our homes, but like being away from our tasks, and
yeah,
like how much time do you have to actually be like, what am I doing and who the fuck am I? And like, maybe
Yeah.
I could be a little different, you know? And that's sort of always stuck with me when it comes to like the value of travel and tourism, is like there is this undercurrent of sort of frustrating desperation, I think.
No, I think that's well said. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap this up.
Sure.
Do we know what we're talking about next week?
No, we didn't do that before pre-production.
Yeah.
But you know what? We'll release it to the masses, I think, in our announcement when we drop this episode tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah. And
Yeah.
either that or later this week when we'll post some hints about it on Instagram. I
Yeah,
think we did
that's
that
great.
once
Yeah.
before.
Few Easter eggs.
Some telltale clues.
Right.
Um, Great. Well, whatever it is, I'm sure it'll be great. And remember to follow the pod, share it with a friend. We'd love to get some new listeners. If you have a chance to write a review or rate it on your podcatcher of choice, that'd be great. And you can also follow us on Instagram at End of the World WMS. And until next week, this has been the End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
I'm Stu, and we will talk to you real soon.